Aloha and welcome to the Caregiver Foundation's monthly caregiver support group. Today we have a special guest speaker on a topic of note to everyone, to seniors, to caregivers. I think a topic that is of prime importance today. And I'd like to hand the microphone over to the Executive Director, Gary Powell, the Caregiver Foundation.
Thank you, Leanne. And welcome, Dr. Blake, and welcome everyone to this month's support group meeting. Dr. Blake is the Director of Nutritional Neuroscience at the Maui Memory Clinic and a Director at the Neuroscience Nutrition Foundation. He's the author of 16 major works on the effects of nutrition on health, including Nutrients for Memory. Dr. Blake's talk is a companion piece to the presentation in March of this year by Dr. Tom Harding, the director of the Maui Memory Clinic, on COVID-19 and its impact on brain function, which was a really wonderful presentation. And we are so looking forward to learning from you, Dr. Blake, and we'll turn it over to you at this point.
Oh, thank you very much. Let me get my slideshow going. Okay, I just need to share the screen. Okay, are you seeing my slides now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, perfectly.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me here. I'm at the Maui Memory Clinic today in Wailuku, Maui, Hawaii. I'm going to talk about inflammation. Of course, temporary inflammation is a good thing, and we need it from time to time. But chronic inflammation can increase your risk, of course, of arthritis, which is a chronic inflammatory condition. I'm also going to talk about heart disease and strokes and how inflammation affects those. I'll mention cytokine storms, although thankfully COVID-19 is starting to recede a bit. And my main focus will be on inflammation and dementia. As Gary, thank you for your introduction, mentioned, I am a doctor of science in nutritional biochemistry, which means in plain English that I look at how nutrition affects our health and our disease. Can you turn your sound off, please? One thing that I do is I look very carefully at all the solutions that I'm going to talk about today are going to be safe and based on good peer-reviewed science. Now, I'll give you a little background on what I've been doing. This is a screen showing you some of the publications that I've been working on. Doesn't include some, but a lot of them are there. Gary mentioned Nutrients for Memory on the bottom left, and that is a summary of our Hawaii dementia prevention trial. And in that book, you can see how we did it, what we used, and of course, you can do it all yourself. There are many other books there. Very recently, I've been the lead advisor and author for the Macmillan Reference Encyclopedia of Alternative Medicine, and went through a lot of the most recent research on alternative remedies. Very interesting stuff. You'll also see that I'm co-author of the Mosby's Drug Guide for Nurses, widely used by nurses and doctors to look up drugs. Of course, drugs change every year, and I'm by no means an up-to-date expert on all the drugs. It takes a lot to keep up with those. I won't mention them all, but I do want to mention Vitamins and Minerals Demystified, a college textbook for McGraw-Hill, and that really helped expand my knowledge and teaching of vitamins and minerals. These are essential. We need them, and people don't always get them. So if you want any of these books, they're available on my website. Almost all of them are under $10 in ebook format. And I'd be glad that if they could help your health. Today's talk, you will learn about reducing excess inflammation by eating more fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds. I'll talk about red onions and grapes and apples, berries, and beans, and they contain quercetin, a flavonoid that's very good for reducing inflammation. Certain foods like soy and kale and broccoli quench inflammation, and these are very helpful. And I will describe to you ways that animal fat, for instance, in cheese or meat or chicken, do increase inflammation in our bodies. My goal is for you to have less memory problems, less heart attacks and strokes, less arthritis, and less deaths from COVID-19. Now, this talk is not only for the caregivers, but the people they care for too, for both of you, because we all need to stay healthy. And it could be very helpful for the people you're taking care of, but I hope that you will all integrate some of this information to just get healthier as you go. Basically, the progression of dementia is when brain cells die off. And brain cells die off from inflammation and oxidation. These two are under our control. We can reduce inflammation and oxidation with our food choices. Another way we can help with especially the vascular dementia is less saturated fat. Just read a study that said that if you reduce saturated fat from the usual excesses, it can reduce damage to the blood-brain barrier by 30 times, lowering the risk of dementia. But 30 times is a big number. And of course, less inflammation in the brain means less brain cells are dying off. And that's a good thing. That means more memory and more ability to make executive decisions. Can diet really affect dementia? Well, this diet was basically what they did is they added more berries and green vegetables and reduced animal fat. And in the MIND diet, which is a combination of a high blood pressure lowering diet and the Mediterranean diet, they were able to slow the rate of cognitive decline equivalent to 7.5 years of younger age. In other words, they put off dementia 7.5 years with this diet. What can you do? You can incorporate some berries and more green vegetables and less animal fat. And you also can put off dementia or slow down the progression, which might be very nice. When I talk to people with dementia, I sometimes ask them, what if you didn't get worse? What if you stayed as you are now? They always seem to say that that would be a very good thing because the fear of getting worse is one of the tough parts. Now, the director of the Maui Memory Clinic, Dr. Harding, has said that if we could delay dementia by 10 years, the epidemic would be virtually over because it strikes principally in the 80s. And if we can delay it, it may not strike at all. Well, this study, and you will see at the bottom of most of my screens, I have a little reference to Good Science. In this case, the journal Neurology is the most prestigious of all of the journals on neurology. And it's a very recent study too. They found that if people just ate more green leafy vegetables, 2 cups a day rather than very few, they were able to slow the rate of cognitive decline equivalent to 11 years of younger age. So there's your 10 years plus 1. Isn't that interesting that diet is that powerful? Now, here's another practical thing you can do. We did in our Hawaii dementia prevention trial. We gave people a cup of berries a day, either blueberries or strawberries or red grapes. And the anthocyanins, that's a big word, anthocyanins. The cyanin part means they're blue, and you can tell the blue pigments in there. The anthocyanins cross the blood-brain barrier. They go to the hippocampus, a memory area of the brain, and they guard it like a guard from inflammation and oxidation, reducing brain cell death and slowing the progression of any neurologic disorder, not just dementia, but also Parkinson's disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and many others. Also been found to help with depression and anxiety. In the Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial, we used safe techniques, and this is the core group that worked there. There's Dr. Harding on the back left, and Catherine, my wife, is in the front in the blue. I'm in the back. And several of the doctors at the the clinic where we did this trial in 2 clinics. I did design and run the trial, and I'm lead author of the published study along with many other authors in this group photo. In the bar chart, you can see that we started with people, we tried to get people at mild cognitive disorder, which is just a precursor to dementia. But by the time we got everything set up for the study, they had dropped from 20 to 19, so technically just beginning dementia. After 3 months, the green bar shows that everyone was now testing more in the normal range, which stayed that way until the end of the year-long study, where they're testing 29 out of 30 on this particular test. We did use other tests that are more detailed, but this one's easier to make a chart of. What did we do? Wouldn't you like to know? A cup of berries daily. 1 ounce of walnuts and 1 ounce of sunflower seeds were ground up and added to the diet. A change in cooking methods. I'll tell you about advanced glycation end products as we go through and how to reduce damage from those. And less saturated fat for less dementia. Now, the less saturated fat was the toughest one for people to do because that means eating less tasty animal fat. We also used a wide variety of supplements, antioxidant minerals, a special form of vitamin E, vitamin C. Coenzyme Q10, normally made in the body as both an energy factor and an antioxidant. Folate, which is a B vitamin, and vitamin B12. We use SAMe, S-adenosyl methionine. Now, this is made in the human body. Sometimes not enough of it is made. We did incorporate 2 safe medical plants, ginkgo biloba, widely used around the world with great information on its helpfulness in memory, and gotu kola, which is principally protective against neurodegeneration and decline in function. So you can find out a lot more about this if you look at my book, Nutrients from Memory, available on my website. I just want to briefly mention inflammation and cytokine storms. Have you heard of cytokine storms? This is an exaggerated inflammatory response to getting infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes COVID-19. If you don't have an exaggerated inflammatory response, you're much less likely to die of COVID-19. Now, hopefully all of us are vaccinated and this is receding, but excess inflammation increased by cytokines is still something we'd like not to have to deal with. If you're interested in boosting your immune system so that it functions optimally to fight not only COVID-19, but flus, colds, other viruses, then I do have my book shown on this screen, Beyond the Mask, How to Survive COVID-19. I do want to state that I think masks are still important. I'm just going with masks and beyond. Now we're all thinking about getting vaccines if we haven't already gotten one. But this fascinating study in the British Journal of Nutrition came out this year about optimizing COVID-19 vaccine efficiency. And they found that if people were low in nutrients in their diet, that they would not develop immunity to COVID-19, even though they're getting the vaccine. So you need quite a list of vitamins to do so. Vitamin A, 2 B vitamins, vitamin C, D, E, folate, and minerals, zinc, copper, and selenium. Are you getting each of these every day? Well, I know I am because I take the brain and body food, which was developed for the for the Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial. And so it's a good idea to make sure that you get good nutrients every day in order to protect your immune system. Here are some spices that have been shown to greatly reduce inflammation. And these have all been shown to be helpful in reducing your risk of a severe case of COVID-19. Of course, they're helpful with any viruses and keeping your immune system strong. We've all heard of turmeric and its curcumin that it has in it. And I have a picture of the pretty orange roots there. Thyme, oregano, rosemary, and sage are all very protective to your immune system. So when it's Mediterranean spice night at your house, you can add these knowing that they have a little extra benefit for you. Hot peppers, red grapes, pomegranate, and lemongrass. There's a cup of lemongrass tea there. It has a lovely smell and also helps boost your immunity to viruses. On a technical level, these activate PPAR gamma, which is peroxisome proliferator activated receptor gamma, which then reduces nuclear factor kappa B. And that slows down all the cytokines so that you don't get excess inflammation. Please pardon me for a couple of fun big words there. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about artery disease. And yes, saturated fats are a big culprit in chronic inflammatory artery disease, but so is inflammation. I'm going to talk just briefly on how this happens. When we eat fats in the diet, saturated fats in the diet, they go into our gut, they're absorbed into our portal blood circulation and go to the liver. The liver packages these fats, these saturated fats, into initially very low density lipoproteins. And then once they circulate, they become the notorious LDL that your doctor's always measuring and perhaps sometimes telling you it's too high. This LDL, especially if it's high and especially if it's not protected by antioxidants like vitamin E, remembering that 93% of Americans are low in vitamin E. If these LDL not protected, they become oxidized and stick to the inside of the artery. When this happens, our immune system attacks them with macrophages and starts eating them up. This creates an inflammatory plaque that is the main contributor to both heart disease and the problems in the brain with strokes and vascular dementia. So it might be a good idea to keep your saturated fats down to, well, say 11 grams or less in your diet every day, and also to reduce inflammation. Oh, by the way, on the screen is my book, No More Heart Attacks. And this is something you can look at if you've had a heart attack or if you don't want to get one. Also on my website for under $10 in the electronic form. What can we do to lower inflammation, especially in the arteries? It turns out that soy products have genistein, which quenches and suppresses this inflammation made by macrophages in human arterial plaque. Isn't that nice? You can have tofu, edamame, or silk soy milk, and all of these help reduce inflammation and have lots of good nutrients as well. Genestein's found also in peanuts, alfalfa sprouts, and chickpeas. I'm not going to go into all technical details on this talk today, and I hope I don't get too technical for you. Just raise your hand if it's too much for you, and I'll go easier on you. What about stroke? How can we reduce stroke risk? Well, this bowl of vegetables is certainly going to help. More vegetables, fruits, beans, whole grains, and nuts help reduce our stroke risk. Less animal fats from beef, chicken, butter, and cheese help reduce our stroke risk. Regular aerobic exercise and, of course, limiting sodium are going to help reduce stroke risk. Antioxidants and anti-inflammatory flavonoids from whole plant foods also reduce risk. If it's a whole plant food, then it has these anti-inflammatory and antioxidant flavonoids in them. If you want to learn more about strokes and how to prevent them, I have a book that's called Stop Strokes Before They Start that I wrote on this subject, also available on my website. Now, how much can we lower them? Whatever your stroke risk is now, it might be 10% or 50% or even 90%, because after all, strokes are the second major killers in the world and the third major killers in America after heart attacks and cancer. So you want to keep your stroke risk down. This little graph on the left shows that if whatever your current stroke risk is, you can reduce it about 99%, with the caveat that you're not already doing these things. But if you're not doing these things on the left and you do them all, you can reduce your stroke risk greatly. So 2 cups of fruit can really help. And now I'm talking about real fruits such as apples rather than apple pie, which would not be as helpful. 2 cups of kale or broccoli. Kale and broccoli have special properties to reduce inflammation. Nuts, seeds, and salad have been found each in studies to reduce your risk of stroke. Now, whatever reduces your risk of stroke also reduces your risk of vascular dementia, which is almost always a contributor to Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, and other dementias. More fiber really helps. And in Hawaii, I have to say less white rice. Studies in China are showing that reducing white rice intakes reduces stroke of risk quite dramatically. And I mentioned soy milk or tofu. So stroke risk is largely due to food choices, not as much due to genetics as some people would think. Here's another easy one. Delicious red grapes have resveratrol, and this reduces oxidation, inflammation, and brain cell death. I like to just take the red grapes, although sometimes the studies look at trans resveratrol, the supplement form of this. But I would always just use the red grapes. Arthritis is a huge problem. Now, if you're a caretaker, you need to get around. You may need to move a heavy person. And having arthritis is not something that's going to be good. It does affect 1 out of 2 over 65 years of age. And being 71 myself, I'm glad that I'm staying away from that. 1/4 of physician visits are due to osteoarthritis, and half of anti-inflammatory pain drug use is due to arthritis. So it's really a huge problem. I wrote this book, Arthritis Relief, which outlines the dietary changes and which of the supplements might be helpful for this. It's again available for under $10 on my website if you need this. How do we reduce inflammation? Let's take a look in the knees, in the heart, to avoid strokes and vascular dementia in the brain, and to keep our risk of chronic diseases and even infectious diseases down. Quercetin is a polyphenol, it's a flavonoid, and quercetin is the most abundant polyphenol that Americans eat in their food in most places in the world. Here are some great sources. If you can incorporate some more red onions and red grapes, apples, blueberries, and beans into your diet, then you can get more quercetin, and that's going to quench inflammation. Now, if you don't mind, I'll mention a little bit of science here about how that works. In our cell membranes, there are phospholipids. Each phospholipid has 2 fatty acids. Because Americans eat a lot of the inflammatory arachidonic acid, 1 or both of these fatty acids are usually arachidonic acid. Quercetin reduces phospholipase, which normally will take this arachidonic acid out of the membrane phospholipids and turn it into inflammatory leukotrienes, painful prostaglandins, and artery clogging thromboxanes. So it's really powerful, and it's delicious too. This is delicious medicine. We can reduce inflammation with turmeric. I like turmeric in a chili rather than in a tablet or capsule because it's hard to absorb. You only get a little bit of it. And if you make it into curry, be sure and add some black pepper because the piperin helps you absorb the turmeric. Wonderful for reducing inflammation. Green tea also reduces inflammation, and that's a tasty, stimulating way to do it. Chamomile tea is another way to reduce inflammation, but in this case, it's sedating to the nerves and the stomach rather than invigorating like green tea. The whole cruciferous family, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, collards, there's several others in that family. They inhibit cytokines, the inflammatory cytokines, and they stop the nuclear transcription factor from making cytokines quite powerfully. So if you can incorporate more of these vegetables into your diet, you'd be healthier all around and with less chronic inflammation, reducing your risk of the big killers and the big pain producers in America. Now, has anyone heard of endotoxins? I can't see you all, so I can't tell if anyone raised their hand, but my wife just did. She hears about them all the time. Endotoxins are when bacteria are killed during the cooking of meat or chicken or fish or dairy products. You know, they all have bacteria in them, and we have to kill that bacteria. But the leftover parts of the dead bacteria are called endotoxins. The long word is lipopolysaccharides. These endotoxins, when they get into our body, make our immune system think that we're infected because our immune system detects, hey, look, there's leftover parts of bacteria. We must be infected. This triggers an inflammatory cascade of principally cytokines that try to attack the bacteria, which aren't even there. But the leftover shells are enough to trigger this. Without these foods, then the risk of inflammatory diseases is reduced. So if you don't eat the animal products, you have less inflammation. This inflammation has been found to last from perhaps 2 to 3 hours after breakfast, 2 to 3 hours after lunch, and 2 to 3 hours after dinner, creating an inflammatory state throughout almost the entire day in people who eat these foods. This study here is from Brain Behavior and Immunity. There's another thing I'd like to tell you about is advanced glycation end products. I mentioned it briefly. When you fry or broil or barbecue meat, it can create these damaging advanced glycation end products. They are very inflammatory. In fact, they generated an estimated 50 times as many free radicals to damage the brain and our joints and arthritis and other parts of our body, our arteries, for instance, than a normal protein would. You can reduce your risk of inflammation by avoiding barbecued, broiled, or fried meat, chicken, or fish. Now, if you cook these in another way, with water, for instance, then that doesn't create the advanced glycation end products. Now, unfortunately, when they age cheese, milk doesn't have it, and fresh cheeses like cottage cheese does not have the AGEs, advanced glycation end products, but aged cheeses do. The proteins and sugars react together to form these. AGEs are very difficult for our bodies to eliminate. And as they circulate in our blood, when they get to the blood-brain barrier, there's a receptor called the RAGE receptor. That's quite a name, isn't it? Receptor for advanced glycation end products. But RAGE might not be so far off because it increases inflammation and oxidation in the brain greatly. So you have under your control how much of these foods you will eat or not eat or serve to your caretakees. I'm going to talk about something else now, which is arachidonic acid. It's a fatty acid, a 20-carbon fatty acid that is an omega-6 fatty acid. We make it in our bodies. All animals make it in our bodies. We make just enough to provide normal arterial tone, the perfect amount of inflammation and the ability to react to, say, a bee sting, and normal blood clotting. But if you take arachidonic in the diet, it can upset this delicate balance, causing excess inflammation, pain, arterial constriction, and blood clotting. None of these things are a really great idea. So the omega-3s reduce inflammation, and examples of sources would be flax, walnut, perilla, chia, and hemp seeds also have this omega-3s. The opposite would be the omega-6 arachidonic acid. This animal fat directly triggers inflammation. It's found in all animal fat, but it's highest in most diets in turkey, chicken, and eggs. Now you're saying, wait a minute, turkey and chicken are better than beef, right? Well, in some ways they are because they have less saturated fat, so that lowers your heart attack risk. But in another hand, they have more arachidonic acid, which causes arterial constriction and thickening of the blood, which increases your risk of heart attacks and strokes. So perhaps it's not the best thing. For those of you who are intellectually very welcoming a challenge, my book, Fats and Oils Demystified, shown on screen, is also available on my website. And it's a textbook complete with quizzes on fats and oils. You can learn all about them. A little pictorial here. You have the arachidonic acid, then these enzymes. You may have heard of COX enzymes, COX-1, COX-2, that cyclooxygenase, and that creates pain. The lipoxygenase enzymes create inflammation, and you see the red inflamed joint. You can block these enzymes with Advil or Celebrex or other anti-inflammatory medication, or you could just not eat the arachidonic acid. Now that's your choice. And remember, there are side effects to these medications, especially with, for instance, arthritis, where people are taking these medications for the rest of their life. Another way to do it is to take EPA, which can be made in our bodies, for instance, from ground up flax seeds, instead of arachidonic acid. The biggest bunch of arachidonic acid comes directly from turkey, chicken, eggs, and animal fat. But if you eat too much of the omega-6 oils, you also can create a bit too much arachidonic acid. So you might want to limit those just a bit. Now, a lot of people think fish oil when they hear omega-3s. And there are a few good reasons not to eat fish oil. There almost universally contaminated with polychlorinated bipheноls and polybrominated diphenyl ethers and DDT. They're often contaminated with mercury and dioxins. And surprisingly, fish oil is high in the omega-6 arachidonic acid. Some fish oil is also high in EPA and DHA, which are the omega-3s. This does blunt their effect somehow. Perhaps my biggest objection to fish oils is that in studies, they're found to be at least 91% rancid at the factory. And rancid oils can contribute to, well, to put it gently, cancer. So we want to minimize the amount of rancid oils we eat. This DHA and EPA are the most fragile fatty acids in the world, and they oxidize just too easily. When they heat the fish to extract them, they get rancid. Fish oil is the biggest source of PCBs. It's damaging polychlorinated biphenyls. Fish are number 2, eggs are number 3. Then dairy, sadly, baby food is a source. Beef, less so. Even vegetable oils have a little bit of this, but 3 compared with 59 for fish oil. Fruits, vegetables, cereals, whole grains, and beans, these things have almost none. And they're the safest from a persistent organic pollutant standpoint. We can just take walnuts and flax seeds and get enough omega-3. We can boost that with chia seeds, which are kind of slimy, and hemp seeds that are also rich in omega-3s. And we can make just enough of our own omega-3s and omega-6s in our bodies if we're well nourished. I like to summarize that we can reduce our inflammation. We can reduce our memory problems, our risk of heart attacks and strokes, our risk of painful arthritis and deaths from COVID-19 by eating more fruit, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds. And I hope you all will. I will too. Maybe try to incorporate some more red onions and grapes, apples, berries, and beans into your diet. Remember that soy and kale and broccoli quench inflammation. And avoid animal fats and cheese, meat, and chicken as much as you can. There are some tasty alternatives out nowadays that make it easy to have, let's say, a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger instead of a beef burger. These are some of the resources that can help you here. Now, if you're experiencing some sort of memory problems, please call the Maui Memory Clinic at 808-244-1007. Talk to Miley, and she can help you get checked out, and then we can help you boost your brain power instead of letting it slowly get worse. And I hope that these books will help you in the future, and I hope that this talk has helped to make you a little healthier in the present too. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be available for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blake. This has been such a wealth of information. And I invite all of you to put a question into the chat box, or if you want to physically raise your hand or raise your hand via the reactions feature. So I'll just start with some questions, and then you folks can please, again, share a question via the chat or by raising your hand. Oh, Dr. Harding, hi. Oh, you'll have to unmute.
Thank you, Dr. Blake, for all of that information. I have the good fortune to be able to speak with Dr. Blake on many occasions, and every time we talk, I learn something new. So if a lot of that went over your head, I'm telling you, the books or having a one-to-one session with him goes a long way. And I have a question about the oils now. I heard you say, because, I try to do the less fish oil because, I've heard you say many times of the pollution. What about flaxseed oil? Can I take that and not worry about the rancid effect?
Well, as my wife likes to say, there's good, better, and best. And the very best way to take flax seeds is to grind them up, use them within a week. And that, I would say, is number one best because of rancidity problems, as you mentioned. Now, number two would be to buy a foil pack of pre-ground flaxseed. That's more convenient to sprinkle it on your salad and keep it refrigerated. And number 3 would be to use flaxseed oil. But during processing, this very delicate oil is often becoming rancid. There's oxygen, light, and heat in the environment where it is made. And these all produce rancidity, and it is very delicate. So I generally recommend that people go with the best solution if they can. And then flax oil would be if they can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Put your hand so it shows on the screen.
Okay.
I'm sure we all have our list of whatabouts. So I'll start with the next one.
Okay.
How about MSG? Can you speak a little bit about this, this additive to so much of our cooking, you know, especially with a lot of Asian cuisines, and you go to a Chinese restaurant and MSG is a concern?
Oh boy, could I talk about that. Monosodium glutamate, or MSG, is added to a lot of Oriental foods and restaurants. And many problems with the brain and neurology are attributable to excitotoxins that stimulate glutamate. And migraine headaches, for instance, many migraines are triggered by MSG. And MSG is not desirable. In fact, I would choose not to eat it myself, because I don't need an overexcitable brain. You can see my brain's already plenty excited all the time. Monosodium glutamate also has been found to trigger problems with autism and in general excitability and anxiety, which is generalized anxiety syndrome, is very common. So what can I say? Avoid it if you can.
I think one of the problems with MSG is almost any product that you pick up, if you don't understand that MSG isn't always labeled MSG, it's labeled natural flavoring or some sort of a, there's probably 16 or 17 different terms that are used. So how is the consumer picking up something in the market, you know, going to have any idea that they're getting it or not getting it? For me, it's easy.
Gary, good question. And I'm afraid that it's very difficult to avoid MSG because, as you say, there are many different names. One example is Bragg's liquid amino acids. I talked to their science director. I said, do you add MSG to this? And he said, no, we don't. But it's formed naturally when we ferment it. Right. So even if they don't add it, it can be formed in the product. So watch out for fermented foods in general, because they can make it themselves. It's a tough one. In general, one thing you can do is see if you have a reaction to the food. And usually I can tell if I eat a big meal of Chinese food with MSG, I do get a headache. And so I'm a little bit of a canary in the coal mine there. I can tell I don't go back there.
Yeah, so that's an interesting segue, Dr. Blake, because one of our questions is about fermented foods like kefir, kimchi, or nation. And so you were speaking about fermented foods in relation to MSG, but how about as in terms of being anti-inflammatory in general?
Well, fermented foods can be, something like kimchi can be very anti-inflammatory, but it's due perhaps more to the cabbage base that it's often made from, and the peppers that are also anti-inflammatory that are added to it. The fermentation process sometimes can produce chemicals that can trigger migraines, for instance. Many migraineurs are sensitive to fermented foods. If you don't suffer from migraines, then that's not a problem for you. I would say oftentimes they can be helpful, but it just depends. And it's kind of personal. So it really depends. If they agree with you, then that's fine. But if they're giving you problems, then you should stay away from them.
Okay, good advice.
And the lactic acid they produce can help with the digestion, sometimes greatly. So they can really be helpful in that way.
Mm-hmm. And then the event that's on everybody's mind these days is the summer barbecue. And, you know, I can just imagine, I can just hear and smell the burgers sizzling on the grill and putting cheese and all of that stuff on top of your burger. So do you have any suggestions as we're heading?
Oh, yes.
In the
Can you
summer?
hand me that sheet if I can show it to them? We just came up with a new sheet that we show people of really fun ways to have a barbecue in the backyard with all your favorite foods, but have nothing unhealthy for you. I don't know how this will look. These are our foods. I guess I'll have to tell you about them. You can't really see them. Such as crispy chicken patties. These are burger patties made from not chicken that are totally delicious. And you can grill those and your friends will love them. And then there's Beyond Burgers. I'm getting great reviews on Beyond Burgers. Throw them on the grill. You won't form advanced glycation end products. You won't form heterocyclic amines to destroy your brain. They are not polluted with all of the persistent organic pollutants and chemicals in our environment because they're not bioaccumulated because there's no cows involved. So then we have field roast breakfast sausages. Those are really yummy. And they can be fried up. We sometimes have barbecues where we live and we serve these to people. And the first thing they say is, we didn't know you ate meat, because they actually are full. In fact, we brought to a potluck, the next one, the Beyond Meatballs. My wife made Beyond Meatballs, which are non-meat meatballs with spaghetti and sauce. It's delicious. And a Hawaiian man was eating it. And he said, he's just enjoying the meatball, saying, you know, you can't get good beef like this in Hawaii. How did you get this good beef? And then we told him, well, there was no beef involved. In other words, these foods can be really delicious. Enjoy your barbecue. You do a shish kebab with lots of vegetables on it, and it can be entirely healthy, and your friends might not even know. Plus, you'll save a buck.
All right. Well, that's really good advice. We're now at the end of our time for Dr. Blake's presentation. And if you have any questions for Dr. Blake, what's the best way for the people to get in touch with you?
Well, email is always easy, and my email is pretty easy. It's steve@drsteveblake.com. Okay. And you could call me at 808-280-6894, or visit my webpage if you want to look at the various books that I've written.
All right.
Now, you did have one more question for me, Leanne, and that's about Aduhelm, the latest, greatest drug for Alzheimer's disease.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Blake. It's the hot topic.
The big question is, would you have remembered to remind me about Aduhelm had you been taking Aduhelm? The answer is probably not. It seems that Aduhelm has been studied for years, and what it is it's trying to destroy the plaque in the brain, the senile plaque in the brain. But senile plaque in the brain really isn't a cause of Alzheimer's. It's more of a sign of Alzheimer's disease. Also, this doesn't seem to work very well to do that. And it works so poorly that it has not ever had a study that showed that it worked. But they reevaluated some data, submitted to the expert panel at the FDA, and it was approved. However, 2 of the experts quit in disgust that it was approved, because they're thinking that they might have approved it more for, let's say, financial objectives than to really help people with Alzheimer's disease. There are many ways to help with Alzheimer's disease, and Dr. Harding can help you, and I can help you, and there are many authors and references out there to help with that. So you might want to keep your eye on Aduhelm and see how the research progresses on that. They approved it very conditionally. They're going to evaluate it at $57,000 a year per dose over the next, I think it's 10 years. And then once they've made their billions, they'll see if it really works or not. How do you like that?
Thanks for reminding me to ask the question. That's important information for all of us to consider going forward. And
I just wish there was a new drug that would just fix it. And I wish this was the one. And I do doubt that it will be, but maybe we can be hopeful.
Yes. And so to all of our participants, I'll be sending out an email once the Dr. Blake's video is posted on YouTube, and I'll also include his contact information. So if you think of questions, after this presentation, then, please feel free to contact him.
I'll be glad to help any of you who are caretakers. I can't tell you how much I thank you for doing one of the toughest jobs in the world. And earlier, Gary mentioned that there's elder abuse, and that may be occasional, but I think caretaker abuse is probably continual in many cases. So I'm with you, and I'll be glad to help if I can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Blake.
Thank you.
And to our participants, our next caregiver support group will be on July 20th at 4 p.m. Honolulu time, and our guest speaker will be Representative Greg Takayama, who will speak about legislative issues involving seniors and caregivers. So again, Dr. Blake, thank you so much for your participation today. Thank you to all of our participants for joining in.
Thank you. Aloha.
And we can end the video now.